All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving into some interesting territory. We're going to be taking a look at this Give God 10 Days of Unconditional Love Starter Kit.
Yeah, this is definitely not your typical self-help book, It's more like a spiritual challenge, kind of like a workout, but for your soul.
Yeah, and don't worry,
Yeah.
listeners, we're not here to convert anyone or preach or anything.
Hmm.
We just thought this was a pretty unique piece of, well, cultural phenomenon, right?
Right. I mean, how do people today approach this whole idea of love and devotion?
Right, exactly. Like, what are the actual steps they're taking? So we thought, let's break it down and see what's inside.
Okay, so let's start with the big idea here. Unconditional love. Now, the kit defines it as reflecting God's love back to God, which I don't know about you, but that sounds a little abstract to me.
Yeah, a little bit. But the way I understand it is that it's not just about feeling love. It's about action. It's about aligning your thoughts, your action, even your daily routine with
Yeah.
this sense of devotion.
So it's like a boot camp for the soul. Yeah, something like that, but with a very specific focus, yeah.
All right, so walk us through this 10-day journey then. What kind of activities are we talking about here?
Well, each day has a different theme and a specific action. Day one starts with acknowledging God's love for you, and they suggest you do this by writing a letter of gratitude to God.
A gratitude letter to God. Now, that's not something you hear every day.
Right, and they even suggest, like, actually listing out those moments where you felt God's presence in your life, which I think, even if you're not particularly religious, could be an interesting exercise, just from a psychological perspective.
Yeah, it makes you think about the power of gratitude, even if it's directed at a concept rather than a specific person.
Exactly.
Okay, so day two takes a bit of a musical turn. It suggests creating a worship playlist. And that made me wonder, is there something unique about music that evokes spiritual feelings? I mean, think about it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, music has this incredible power to transcend language, to tap into those deep emotions. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. And it makes me think about like how music, even secular music, can evoke a sense of the sublime. Maybe there's a reason why so many spiritual traditions use music and chanting.
Totally. And it's interesting. The kit doesn't specify what kind of music to include, which I kind of like. It's open to interpretation, like what kind of music speaks to your soul, what evokes that sense of the divine or whatever you might call it.
I mean, what moves you? Okay, so day three gets a little more introspective. It focuses on expressing love through prayer, but specifically a prayer of pure praise, no requests allowed.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? It's like a pure meditation on gratitude and devotion.
Yeah, it is. And it makes you wonder, does this type of prayer cultivate a sense of surrender?
Hmm.
And if so, how does that tie into unconditional love? Because usually when we think of love, we think of it as active, expressive, right?
Right.
But maybe there's this element of letting go, of accepting things as they are.
Yeah.
That's also part of loving unconditionally.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that sense of surrender comes up again later on in the challenge on day 6. They suggest writing down your fears and then tearing up the paper.
Oh, wow. It's definitely a powerful image.
Yeah, it is.
But it also makes me think, is it healthy to surrender all fears? Or is there a balance between acceptance and taking action to change things? It's definitely food for thought.
Definitely. And it's one of the things that the kit doesn't really address directly. It kind of just throws these ideas out there and leaves you to wrestle with them.
Right. It's like, here you go. Good luck.
Yeah.
All right, then we get to day 4. And as if facing your fears wasn't enough, now the focus shifts outwards.
Yeah. So now it's all about expressing your love for God by serving others.
Mm.
It could be anything from, volunteering your time to helping a neighbor or even just offering a kind word to someone.
So they're connecting loving God with loving people. It's like a ripple effect, extending that love outwards.
Right. And that brings up another interesting question. Could these acts of service be meaningful even outside of a religious context? Like, is there something inherently valuable in helping others, regardless of your belief?
Yeah, that's a good point. It taps into that fundamental human need for connection and belonging, right?
Right.
Makes you wonder, what if we all just focused on spreading kindness and compassion, regardless of religious affiliation?
Absolutely.
And speaking of spreading things, day 8 encourages sharing your faith with others. That could be through a testimony, a Bible verse, or just a conversation about your beliefs.
Right. It's that outward expression of faith and action, which can be a really powerful force in people's lives.
Yeah.
But of course, it also raises questions about proselytizing and the ethics of sharing your beliefs with others.
Yeah, it's a sensitive topic for sure. And I think it's important to approach those conversations with respect and sensitivity.
Hmm.
But on a broader level, I wonder if there's a way to apply that idea of spreading the good news, as they call it, in a more universal way.
Hmm. I see what you mean. Instead of focusing on a specific religious message, what if we shared stories of hope, resilience, human kindness, things that uplift and inspire people regardless of their spiritual beliefs?
Exactly. It's about spreading positivity and inspiration. I like that.
Yeah.
All right, then just when you think you're getting the hang of expressing your love outwardly, day 9 throws a curveball and takes a sharp turn inward with the concept of sacrifice.
Ooh, yeah. This one's a bit more intense.
Fasting, giving something up to demonstrate your devotion, that's a concept that you find in many different spiritual traditions, but it can seem pretty intense, especially in a modern context.
Yeah, it definitely raises questions. Is it about deprivation? Is it about redirecting your focus? Could giving up something like, I don't know, social media actually be beneficial in today's world?
It's interesting. It makes me think about the idea of a spiritual detox, like clearing out the mental clutter to make space for something more meaningful.
Yeah, and maybe there's something to be said for that. Even if you're not doing it for strictly religious reasons, the idea of intentionally creating space for reflection and connection, that's pretty powerful.
Right. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've gone from gratitude letters to worship playlists, acts of service, and even sacrificing things we enjoy. It's quite a mix.
Yeah, it's a pretty diverse set of practices.
And we haven't even gotten to the Bible verses yet,
Yeah.
because throughout the kit, they weave in these carefully chosen scriptures to support each day's theme. It's like they're providing a soundtrack of sacred text to accompany the journey.
Yeah, it's like they're saying, here's some extra inspiration.
Right, exactly.
Hmm.
So let's dive into those scriptures a bit. How do they enhance the experience, and what can we learn from them, even if we're not approaching this from a strictly religious perspective?
Okay, so one verse that really stood out to me is from 1 John 4:1 time. It says, "We love because he first loved us." And I think that verse really sets the stage for the entire challenge because it highlights the idea that our ability to love, it stems from a source outside ourselves.
Yeah, I can see how that would resonate with someone who believes in God's love as that source. But even outside of a religious context, it makes you think about where our capacity for love comes from.
Right. Is it innate? Is it learned? Is it a combination of both? I mean, that's a question that philosophers and psychologists have been grappling with for centuries.
It really is. And then there's this verse from Psalm 119.105, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." That one really speaks to the power of Scripture as a guide for life. But it also makes me think about, what are the lamps and lights that guide us in a more secular sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it could be anything from our personal values to ethical principles to the wisdom we gain from experience. It's a beautiful metaphor for seeking guidance and illumination,
hmm
regardless of where we find it.
Right. I like that. It's like these verses are little nuggets of wisdom, prompting us to think more deeply about these universal human experiences.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the fascinating things about studying religious texts. Even if you're not a believer, you can find these universal truths that speak to the human condition regardless of your spiritual beliefs.
It's like extracting the essence of human wisdom from these ancient texts. Okay, so we've explored the daily themes, the activities, we even dipped our toes into the scriptural inspiration behind it all. But what happens after those 10 days are over?
Well, that's where things get really interesting because the kit emphasizes that this is just the beginning, not the end. It's about building a foundation for a deeper relationship with God.
So it's not about achieving some kind of spiritual perfection in 10 days.
Not at all. It's about cultivating habits and practices that you can integrate into your daily life, long after the challenge is over.
So they're setting you up for a lifetime of spiritual practice.
That's right. And I think it's about recognizing that spiritual growth is an ongoing journey, not a destination.
Hmm, that makes sense. But I'm curious, what does going deeper look like in this context? Like, what are some of the ways they suggest continuing the journey?
Well, they encourage you to continue exploring the themes and practices that resonated most strongly with you. Maybe that's dedicating more time to prayer, volunteering regularly, or making a conscious effort to see God's love reflected in the world around you.
So it's about taking those seeds that were planted during the challenge and nurturing them so they can continue to grow.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But I can't help but wonder, what if someone really resonated with these practices, but didn't necessarily subscribe to the, religious framework? Could those same principles be applied in a more secular way?
That's a fantastic question, and I think that's what we should explore further. I mean, we've just scratched the surface of this Give God 10 Days of Unconditional Love Starter Kit, and I have a feeling there's a lot more to unpack here.
Yeah, I think you're right. We've barely begun to dive deep. So stay tuned, folks, because we're about to venture into some uncharted territory as we explore how these principles might apply beyond a strictly religious context. Welcome back, everybody. So we've been really digging into this Give God 10 Days of Unconditional Love Starter Kit. And, it's really raising some thought-provoking questions. We were just talking about, could these principles actually go beyond a strictly religious context?
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea to consider. Like, at its core, the challenge is all about cultivating this specific quality of love, right? This kind of love that's selfless, unwavering, freely given, not about keeping score or anything like that.
Right. It's not about that I love you IF kind of thing. It's about a love that simply exists without any conditions attached. So I'm curious, could that kind of love actually transform our relationships, even outside of a religious context?
Yeah, it's a radical idea when you think about it, isn't it? Like, imagine approaching all our relationships, our partners, families, friends, even strangers, with that same unconditional love. It kind of goes against the grain of how we normally operate. You know what I mean?
Totally. I
Yeah.
mean, we're so used to love being transactional.
Uh,
I love you if you make me happy, if you meet my needs, if you behave a certain way. But this true unconditional love, it just throws all that out the window.
exactly. It's like saying, I value you just for being you, even with all your flaws and imperfections and all that. It's a powerful concept, but I can imagine it's incredibly challenging to actually put into practice.
Oh, absolutely. It requires so much self-awareness,
Yeah.
and letting go of our ego's need to control and all that. But the potential rewards, I mean, they could be huge. Imagine the freedom and depth of relationships where everyone truly felt seen and accepted no matter what.
Yeah, it would be like a complete shift from love based on like fear and scarcity to love rooted in abundance and acceptance. But the question is, how do we actually translate that into our everyday lives?
Well, the kit gives us some, practical exercises that we could adapt. Like, remember that gratitude letter from day one?
Yeah.
That we can easily write a similar letter to, a loved one,
Yeah.
expressing appreciation for who they are and what they bring to our lives, just without the, God-focused language.
Exactly. And that act of service on day 4, that could be incorporated into our daily interactions too. Little things like holding the door for someone, offering a helping hand, or just, truly listening with empathy. It all contributes to that ripple effect of kindness.
Right. And what about that whole spreading the good news thing from day 8? We were talking about, sharing positive stories or messages instead of religious ones.
Oh, I love that idea. It's like instead of focusing on a specific religious message, just being a beacon of light, radiating positivity and kindness wherever we go without any agenda attached.
Yeah, exactly. And even surrendering our fears from day 6, I feel like that has a secular application as well. I mean, we
Yeah.
all have fears and anxieties, regardless of our beliefs, right?
Right. Absolutely. And instead of, tearing up a piece of paper, we could simply acknowledge those fears, focus on what we can control, and then try to let go of the rest.
Right.
Cultivate a sense of trust, maybe not necessarily in a higher power, but in ourselves and the flow of life.
Yeah. It's about acceptance and recognizing that we can't control everything. Then there's day 7, celebrating God's creation. Even if we don't believe in a specific creator, we can still appreciate the beauty and wonder of nature, right?
Right. Taking a walk in the park, watching a sunset, noticing the details of a flower, these are all ways to connect with something bigger than ourselves, something that can inspire awe and gratitude.
It's about finding that sense of wonder and connection in the everyday. Okay, so we've seen how prayer and meditation can be adapted for a more secular context. But what about the idea of sacrifice from day 9? Like giving something up?
Yeah, I think that could be beneficial even outside of a religious context. Maybe it's not about fasting, but maybe it's about choosing to disconnect from technology for a while, Or consciously simplifying our lives, creating that space for reflection and intention that we were talking about.
It's fascinating to see how all these practices can be reinterpreted and applied in different ways. Like we're taking these concepts and making them our own.
Yeah, and I think it really highlights how these themes of love, gratitude, service, connection, they kind of transcend any specific belief system, It's like they tap into something universal within us.
It's like we're peeling back the layers and we find this core human experience that, it connects us all.
Yeah.
But I do wonder, what would the creators of this kit think about all this, our exploration of their work?
Yeah, it's a good question. Would they be open to these broader interpretations, or would they see it as like diluting their message? It's hard to say. But I do think the fact that their work has sparked this conversation, even outside of its intended audience, says something about the power of the ideas themselves. Yeah, it shows that these themes resonate with people on a deep level, regardless of their beliefs. It makes you wonder, could we take this even further?
What do you mean?
Well, we've talked about applying these principles to our individual relationships, but what if we zoomed out even more? Like, what if we considered applying unconditional love to the systems and structures that shape our society?
Whoa, okay, now that's a big leap. What would that even look like?
That's the question we're going to explore when we come back for the final part of our deep dive. So stay tuned, everyone.
All right, we're back and ready to really stretch our imaginations here. We've been exploring this Give God 10 Days of Unconditional Love Starter Kit. And, we've talked about how it could apply to our personal lives and relationships.
Right, but now we're going to try to zoom out even more. We're going to consider, like, what would it actually mean to apply this whole unconditional love thing to, like the big systems and structures that shape our whole society?
Yeah, this is definitely a challenge, but I'm game if you are.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin with something like this?
Well, I was thinking maybe we could start with education. Like, imagine if unconditional love was the foundation of our entire education system.
Okay, I'm listening.
So instead of just prioritizing, grades and test scores and all that, we'd be focusing on the whole child, like their emotional well-being, their social skills, even their, spiritual development.
Yeah, that would be a huge shift. Schools would become these like nurturing spaces where every kid felt seen and valued and supported no matter what their background was or, what their academic abilities were.
Oh, exactly. And think about the classrooms. They'd be these places that celebrated curiosity and creativity, where, making mistakes was seen as an opportunity to learn and grow, and where things like collaboration and empathy were like woven into the whole learning experience.
Wow, sounds kind of utopian, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so what about healthcare? How would unconditional love transform the way we care for, the sick and the vulnerable?
Well, for starters, we'd stop seeing patients as just a collection of symptoms. We'd approach them as whole people with like inherent dignity and worth.
Right.
Healthcare would become more holistic, addressing not just their physical needs, but also their emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. It would be about like true healing, not just treating diseases.
It would be a system built on like genuine compassion, empathy, where patients felt truly heard and understood throughout their, whole healing journey. It makes you wonder why it's not already like that, honestly.
Right.
Okay, so we've got education, healthcare. What else?
Well, what about our justice system? Can you imagine a justice system that was actually infused with unconditional love?
I'm trying to.
Where the focus was on like rehabilitation and restorative justice instead of punishment and retribution.
Okay, yeah. So instead of just locking people up and throwing away the key, we'd be focusing on, helping them heal, helping them reintegrate into society, recognizing that everyone deserves a chance for redemption.
Exactly. It would be a complete transformation of how we approach justice, a system that prioritizes healing and restoration for both the victims and the offenders.
It sounds pretty radical and honestly kind of idealistic.
It does, doesn't it? But I think that's the whole point of this exercise. It's about daring to imagine a world where unconditional love isn't just like a personal virtue, but a guiding principle for how we structure society itself. It's about pushing beyond the limitations of our current systems and imagining something truly transformative.
Yeah, something that reflects like the best of humanity.
Right. And I know it seems like a daunting task, but we've seen how even small acts of unconditional love can create these like ripple effects of positive change in our personal lives and in the world around us. So what if we could like scale that up? What if we could apply that same principle to our institutions and our systems?
It's a pretty powerful thought. Like, if enough of us actually embraced these principles and started living them out in our daily lives, in our interactions with each other, could we actually shift the collective consciousness? Could we create a more loving world? It's inspiring, but it's also like a lot of responsibility.
Oh, absolutely. And I think even if we never achieve that ideal, perfectly, the journey itself is transformative. Like just the act of striving to love more unconditionally changes us. It expands our capacity for compassion and connection. And that's got to be worth something, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not about reaching some perfect destination. It's about like the ongoing process of becoming more loving beings.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive. I mean, we've gone from these very personal practices to thinking about, societal structures from practical applications to like some pretty deep philosophical stuff.
Yeah, we really covered a lot of ground, didn't we? We started with this Give God 10 Days of Unconditional Love Starter Kit, and we ended up in some pretty unexpected places.
We did. And, as always, we encourage you, our listeners, to continue the exploration. Like, what resonated with you? What challenged you? How can you take these ideas and make them your own? How can you integrate these principles into your life, your relationships, your interactions with the world?
Yeah, keep questioning, keep reflecting, and keep seeking those deeper connections that make life so rich and meaningful.
That's a great place to end it. So until next time, folks, keep diving deep.